Mr. Liddy, please continue your examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Valenzuela, are you familiar with Linda Brickman?
Yes.
Who is Linda Brickman?
She is a temporary employee that we had served for this whole almost this 2020 cycle, various elections.
And did she serve at McTech?
She did.
And what is McTech?
Maricopa County Tabulation Election Center.
And what were her duties when serving at McTech as a temporary employee during the 2020 election?
Several tasks. She signature verification. She served in the duplication board. Other outgoing scheduling for flagging, as we call it, to schedule ballots.
Was Ms. Brickman reprimanded while she was a temporary employee here?
She was.
Was she reprimanded for complaining that there were problems with the ballot duplication equipment?
No, she was not.
Why was she reprimanded?
She was reprimanded, and I was part of that reprimand meeting along with Code Director Jarrett because she was taking photos of signatures during the signature verification, which is obviously not allowed.
Mr. Valenzuela, you just prior to the break, you testified at length about the comprehensive process that Maricopa County elections and report employees use in the signature verification process. Would you say it's clear that Maricopa County does not use the single exemplar standard?
Maricopa County does not, nor is it best practice to use a single exemplar. And if I may, I can give you statistical numbers that Maricopa County 2020 alone, in general, there were over 456,000 voters that returned a ballot that were deemed good sig based on that exemplar, the one exemplar. So 456,000 voters in this 2020 general that only had one exemplar. That would have then, if we were following that forensic standard, would have been deemed insufficient.
And therefore would have been disenfranchised as voters.
Correct.
May I ask you to take a look at what I have marked as Exhibit 30.
Yes.
And I'm going to take a moment to allow others in this proceeding to take a look at that. 30.
What was the original number?
The original number was 89.
Thank you.
Mr. Wellencheck, do you have that in front of you?
I do. Thank you.
Mr. Valenzuela, do you recognize this document?
Yes, I do.
What is this document?
This is a document that I put together to show the signatures that were identified as inconclusive by both examiners that were present on December 1, that they had questions because there was, for most happenstance, was that there was only one exemplar. And this is my proof of concept of what we do to review.
And this document consists of 15 of those exemplar pages.
The total amount that were questioned as in, and not necessarily deemed in rejected, but inconclusive based on certain factors of one exemplar.
Okay. And I believe you stated that you created this document.
Yes.
Your Honor, I would move that Exhibit 30 be admitted.
Any objection?
Objection.
And Your Honor, because
30 is admitted, and it's under seal.
thank you, Your Honor, and because it's under seal and it includes signatures, I'm not going to ask that it be placed up on the screen. I think everyone has it in front of them and can follow along. Okay. So let's start, Mr. Valenzuela, by turning to the third page. And up on the very left, you'll see there's a number 8. And then there's a voter ID number, which I'm not going to read. See that?
Yes.
Now, I want you to be careful not to read the names that are on this. But I want you to assist the court by walking through this. And I want to start by saying that on this document, there are, on this page of the document, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 11 rectangles in green. Do you see those? And you created those?
Yes.
So what I'd like you to do is describe for the court, you were going through the process of signature verification. What is it on this page that you would use in order to determine whether the ballot that's associated with this green envelope affidavit should be counted or not?
Well, just as to start off as for the exhibit, that every image in the top left-hand corner is the actual November 3rd, 2020 general election affidavit that we would have been using as the primary. And the rest are exemplars of different signatures on file for the given voter. So in our process, again, we're looking at those to see what match. So in this particular record for this particular page, we are looking at some of those. There are local characteristics and broad characteristics as trained by the forensic document examiner. Some of those are swoops, close, initial entry, beginning or end strokes, pen lifts, ascenders, descenders, all of these terms. But to keep it simple is if you look at these boxes, an example in this particular record, the first one is the last three letters of the voter's signature. You can see that A-N-N-E, and then that's not the person's name, that's the N, the last. But you'll see how those strokes, those upstrokes, those descending strokes, that end stroke of that E for this particular voter is 100% match. You continue on and you just look at the initial, the middle initial there, it's 100% match. And then you look at that beginning letter of this particular name, the H, those characteristics of that and continue through, even to going to the finite of that dot that's over the I, how high that extends up, that is exactly present in some of these examples. But using the same concept that we don't just use that. We have other data that in front of us. We know that we tested that address 90 days out. But in addition to that, we have on this voter registration form or on these affidavits as exemplars, the voter has given us their phone number back in as far back as 2014 on their registration form. They listed a phone number on their registration.
And I see that you have put a green rectangle around those three phone numbers that were given 3 times. And as a signature verification examiner, what are you looking for when you look at those 3 handwritten phone numbers?
The phone number themselves obviously lends itself to say that if this were, by preponderance of the evidence, once again, if this were stolen, would they know all these broad characteristics and even local characteristics, but moreover, would they know that individual's phone number that is proven on this vetted gospel voter registration form from 2014, an example. But some of that, too, is actually identification of a signature or a handwriting. So if you look at the phone number written on the November 2020 general election and compare it to just the number blindly without looking at the handwriting, the number matches. So that is another added. But look at some of these features of that phone number. I'll use the number 2 as an example since everybody can see. You can see that downstroke. You can see that swash where that, too, is identical throughout, not only on the November 20, but even all the way back to 2014.
I'm going to do my best Professor Gates imitation and ask you to please turn the page.
Okay.
I'll ask you to turn it twice. And you'll see on the upper left hand there's a number 18.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a voter ID number, which we're not going to read in. And I want you to go through the same process on this one. This is a very different looking name or signature, if you will. And you have placed 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 green rectangles. Please tell the court the process you would use to go through the signature verification on this exemplar.
For this one, as an example, again, the top left-hand corner is the 2020 election. This was one of the samples that met 2 categories of why it could have been deemed insufficient by the experts under a forensic protocol. But the signature is an electronic signature from Service, Arizona that in and of itself was too small to see unless you zoomed in. So at that point, and it was only one exemplar that existed. But even with that, when you zoom in, and we were able to do that, we did not go back to some of these to zoom in, even though it was requested if they wanted to. But when we would, in a manager's level, would have zoomed in, or even at a certain level, we look at these again. The E-L-L-E within that name, the characteristics of that E, and then the last name being almost identical in the handwriting. It's printed, not signed cursive, and it's printed throughout this registration form and on a printed name on the actual packet. But again, does that in and of itself lend itself to be? No, we also would take that next step, which is, you'll see shown on this exhibit is a phone number. Once again, not so much written on the registration, because a voter can add a phone number when they join People. Then that gets added to their voter registration record. So this particular voter has a phone number on file that matches 100% to the phone number that was written on the November 2020.
Mr. Valenzuela, you mentioned that the signature that was available was very small, and that your employees had the capability to zoom in. Is that a capability that all of the Maricopa County employees would have that are tasked with looking for signature verification?
That is indeed. During the review with the examiners, only one side of the screen was able to zoom, because it wasn't the system we were using to see all the repository signatures didn't allow to zoom, but it is a feature 100% for all of our employees, plus one side of the screen for this.
This particular voter has 3 E's as an echo in the name. Is there something about the way the E is that is significant for a signature verification employee?
It is, and again, that's what I was indicating, that there is a local characteristic of that E, of how it is printed, and they printed it not only on their affidavit from the November, but also on this registration.
So it's not, just for clear, it's not just that it is printed rather than in cursive, but it's the manner in which it's consistently printed.
Correct. So if you look at the curve, the structure, the actual spacing between the end stroke and the end of that E, the construct of that E, you can see that this is a very specific characteristic that is unique to this particular.
So under the process which your employees are trained, this ballot would be counted?
This ballot would be, yes, would be considered a matching signature based on, again, with the addition of that phone number that lends itself to say it is not. And I won't use the term fraud, because we're not looking for fraud. We're looking for the veracity of this signature match. What else can we use to help make sure we're not disenfranchised?
I would ask that you turn 3 pages. And if you look up in the upper left, it should say number 31.
I'm there.
You see that? And I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 green rectangles. Would you use the same process and go through this exemplar and inform the court what is on this that would assist one in performing the task of signature verification for voting purposes?
Sure. In this case, there was only 2 exemplars. Again, better than 1, if you will, using the forensic standard. But for us, as long as we can meet that standard, and in this case, you look at the first initial, the M of this particular voter, they have that swash, that entry level on that M, that is unique characteristic to that particular voter, and it's consistent throughout not only these 2 exemplars, but in the actual affidavit signing. You can go as far as looking through the whole remaining, the last 2 digits of that first name and match that up. The overarching, the ascenders in this particular L, and where they come back down, that's something you can quickly look at. But most importantly, in this particular signature as well, again, this handwritten phone number exists on the registry, one of the exemplars, and there is a specific reverse downstroke of that 6 that a lot of people do that. It's not that that's not true, but it is consistent, and it matches exactly up in this phone number on the affidavit, including the last 2 digits, which are the 5s, are exemplars or examples of this handwritten on the form. Last but not least, that 8, where that ascend or descending open-ended 8 exists there on the affidavit as well. So just adding to the validity and the veracity of us being able to say that is the voter that received it, that is the voter's signature and a map.
So under the protocol that you teach and that your employees, temporary and permanent, use, that ballot would be counted in the election.
Correct.
All right, I would ask that you turn 4 pages. Upper left, number 5050.
I'm there.
Everybody with us? 50. And I see there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of the green rectangles. Same process for the court, please.
This one is another example of only one exemplar that existed when we did the review with the expert examiners. In this case, I'm a little bit hard-pressed to even find why we wouldn't have looked at that, other than that only one exemplar existed. But one of the key features here on top of the first initial, the J, that, again, that entry level, the swash that's in that end stroke of that J, but the one key thing is one of the things that the examiners mentioned, there's many points to a signature, pen lifts, end strokes. In this case, the lack thereof. This individual voter on their affidavit does not lift their pen even from their first name into their last name. You'll see that A into the K. That exists 100% into the signature on the November 2020 affidavit. That's pretty distinctive, no pen lift, or the lack thereof. Then again, couple that for our benefit on preponderance, that voter has the same exact phone number listed on their 2020 packet as they do on their voter registration record.
And I would ask that and this ballot would be counted.
Absolutely.
And I would ask that you turn 2 pages. And on the upper left side, you'll see a number 86.
Okay.
Again, I see a total of 5 green rectangles. Same process for the court, please.
Now, this one, this is one of the ones that was, all of the other ones, majority were because they had one exemplar that they were highlighted out. This was exactly that same thing, but there was a question of saying, well, there's a lot more detail in the affidavit signature. So it is only one exemplar than there are in the November 2020 affidavit. Again, speaking about speed, speaking about you're in line, you have this offer, this signature, or you got it at home, depending on your environment. But in here, again, there's another example of one exemplar, but that this ascending initial in the first S of the first name just is almost the ascender itself, and that back loop is almost 100% matched. You look at crosshatch. You look at the cross where they make their, in this case, the last name starts with an E. That isn't in, although they have some more distinct characteristics in the affidavit, it is still that directional stroke that we're looking at, followed by, again, one more time, a prime example of the fact that the voter's phone number is on the registration, and it's listed here on the affidavit in 100%.
And this voter has a T in the voter's name in the middle of the name, and it is, what can you tell me about the way that T is crossed?
Well, that T, again, it's part of their characteristics. When they come back over that T and they have it up here, and then they return with that. Whether it's an overhand loop, underhand, the characters, no two signatures will look alike, and that was testified by the examiner. So that crosshatch and that reverse coming back is another example of what. And some of these, like I said, may not be indicative here because there isn't a tracking that it went from an exception to a manager, but likely though these would have came, I would say pretty solidly came to a manager who then would have used what I'm explaining as election expertise and signature review and would have had all of this available to them. We don't ask the entry level to do what I'm doing. We ask our manager level.
And under the process that you've trained, this voter's right to vote would not have been disenfranchised.
Correct. And that is our goal, is to, again, not put these voters on trial or these signatures on trial, but to say, what can we do to test the veracity of this signature? What information do we have as far as signature repository? And one exemplar is not a standard for election signatures.
Your Honor, I have no further questions.
Thank you. Any questions from defendants?
No, Your Honor.
Any questions from the
Yes, Your Honor. I just have a couple of questions. Hi, Mr. Valenzuela. These signatures that you were just looking at with Mr. Liddy in Exhibit 30, these were all part of the 100 signatures that were reviewed on December 1. Is that right?
Need you to unmute, Mr. Valenzuela.
I'm sorry, yes, that is correct.
And you were there on December 1 and reviewed all 100 signatures, right?
I was, and I did. That is correct.
And you personally did that review based on your experience and your training that you testified about earlier?
Correct. The 30-plus years of election signature verification.
And based on your review, were you satisfied that all 100 signatures were a match?
100%.
No further questions.
Mr. Willenchik, please.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Valenzuela, can you tell us about your training in handwriting analysis?
Yes, I had indicated that we have and are required to go every 2 years to be trained by affiliated forensic laboratories. Was the initial under William Flynn, who is also a renowned signature verification or document forensic expert, and then of most recent last couple of years, specifically June 24th, 25th, with Kathleen Nicolaitis, which is part of the Associated Forensic Laboratory, LLC, and underwent that training. In addition to the joint establish of best practice guides through the EAC, the Election Assistance Commission.
Would you consider yourself to be a professional forensic document examiner?
I would not consider myself to be forensic document examiner, but signature verification expert through the election protocol. I would indeed consider myself qualified for that.
Did you testify earlier that there would be 80 employees at a time doing signature verification?
We could have upwards. For the entry level, we had at most potentially 25 to 30, and then we could have all of our permanent staff, to include our recording deed document recorders, if need be, serve, having had that certification training at the manager level.
I just want to understand when you say you could have, in actuality, on average, how many employees were actually doing signature verification at any given time?
We could have, on average, we had approximately no more than 30, but we could have up to 80 on a all-hands-on deck should we get hit with 200,000 signatures or mail dropped in a day, as an example.
Were all employees who were performing signature verification doing so on-site at McTech?
They were. Other than, because it is a digital signature, had we had to invoke the all-hands-on-deck, we do have a secure connection to our other office downtown where the recording office is, and they could securely log into this system, which requires approval and credentials to be able to log into it with their user.
Well, this all-hands-on-deck situation you've described, did that actually happen during this election?
We did not have a need to have to go to using our recorder staff, no.
And were off-site employees actually used for signature verification?
There were a few off-site employees, such as our managers, that are part of the elections team that happen to be at our downtown office that would indeed assist. And I will indicate that at no time do we touch these affidavit envelopes for the initial signature verification. They are all scanned in digitally, and they are captured as you see on this particular, on the actual document I prepared. So we are not having ballots, live ballots circulated. It is only the digital image through our secure signature verification application.
Were any observers, credentialed observers, or other observers present off-site?
On the off-site, no, that I'm not aware of.
Were the political parties made aware that off-site signature verification was occurring?
The process itself, before even it began, was offered to the parties and the observers to actually, one, come in and meet with me so we could show them, because it was going to be under the pandemic environment, a little bit unique, but wanted to show them what was going to happen. And they were told that this is using a digital image, but they were told also that there was that potential for the offsite. And of those observers, all of them that came, only 3 opted to participate in that demonstration and explanation.
Okay, and I don't want to be difficult, but the question was whether the political parties, well, the question I will ask is whether political parties were notified that off-site observation or off-site verification was actually occurring.
They were as part of our initial instruction that these are digital. We could, and again, it was limited to potentially 1 or 2 individuals in the election side downtown, and even that, there's not much that would have been processed through there. But yes, the parties were aware that we are doing this electronically in different rooms, different facilities, if need be.
I think the testimony is the parties were notified of the potential for that, but they were not notified that it was actually occurring, correct?
Yes, they were notified that if you're saying that we could or would be doing that, that's what they were notified of.
They were not notified that it was actually occurring off-site.
We didn't go further to say that it's now occurring in room 1, room 2, or room 3 off-site. No, we didn't go to that.
Just 1 second. Could you tell me, on average and in actuality, how much time the Tier 1 workers spend reviewing a signature?
Because we're asking them to do, for all intents and purposes, 100% match, if you see that the characteristics, having given that training, I would say no more than under a minute.
If I were to tell you they spend on average just a few seconds, would you dispute that?
No, I would not. If the signature is as matched and as clean, all the characteristics, both local and broad, no, I wouldn't dispute that. Or the signature verification, not using forensic protocols, but using a match. And knowing the front end that signature and that packet has been tracked all the way to the voter, the address has been vetted and tested prior to the packet being sent, using those, understanding in that front-loaded information to these, that yes, I don't by any means say that it should take more than, with 100% match, a second to compare that signature.
Thank you. When you testified earlier that verification is being done off-site, how was the data transmitted? Was it done over the Internet?
It is not done over the Internet. All of our data is secured through if you will, a secure web farm VPN, just like anything else that we do. We have the office that is still, we are accessing the voter registration database just like they are, and it is into a secure protocol environment and servers.
So we're going to test my knowledge of computer science here, but are you saying then there is a private online connection through which the data is transmitted?
I would not use the word online. No, it's not. It is actually, again, without getting into if you want more technical expertise, but it is a virtual private network, but it is done through different connectivity other than online.
It's a virtual private network, correct, VPN?
Yes.
Okay. Well, it's done through a connection that leaves the building, correct?
I'm sorry, could you state that again?
It's done through a connection that leaves the building, right?
It is done through a connection, correct. Whether it's a direct connection, we do have some where the T1 lines are run direct, but it is a secure connection.
Okay. And that connection does not run directly to the offsite. It does run through what I'll call Internet service, to your knowledge, right?
No, it does not run through Internet service. That's a distinctive difference. Is not run through Internet service.
So your testimony is that a VPN does not run through Internet servers?
My testimony, as far as to my extent of the technical, is that we are not using any outside online. We can use cellular that we contract through. We can use direct T1 But even in our McTech facility, in the area of the tabulation center, there is no internet connectivity. I can tell you there is not, so hence it has to be through the direct connect.
Through the what, I'm sorry?
Direct connect, or through that VPN that is running directly from a server through a T1 that then establishes that into the particular McTech facility.
Are you familiar with the statutory hand count that is performed with respect to voting machines?
I am.
In this election, the hand count was performed, I should say ended, on November 9th. Is that correct?
That's correct.
However, the process of duplicating and adjudicating ballots did not finish until November 13th, correct?
That's correct.
So the hand count could not possibly have captured any ballots that were subject to duplication or adjudication after 11/9, correct?
It would not, and nor could it, or is it required to. If you read the statute, it actually indicates that we have to begin the hand count within 48 hours of the election closing. So we would have to have wrapped up. But it does include sampling, absolutely, because we began tabulating at 14 days prior. So all ballots that were duplicated or potentially tabulated or adjudicated would and could be part of those randomly selected batches.
Well, and again, just so our record is clear, you are telling me that all of those adjudicated and duplicated ballots could not have been sampled because they weren't finished until after you stopped sampling, right?
They could not be because the law doesn't require it as a random sampling. It requires to be political parties selected those. But yes, they could not. If we continue tabulating to 13 days, we would not wait until 13 days after the end of the election to begin sampling or randomly sampling.
Okay. No further questions. Thank you.
Redirect, please.
Are you familiar with the special Cisco VPN system that's utilized in the McTech facility?
I'm aware of the fact that we use that. I'm not familiar with its innards or how that is.
So if we were to explain to the court all of the security features and protocols of our special Cisco VPN system, you would not be the best witness to describe that to the court. Is that correct?
That is correct.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you. Any further witnesses, further testimony or evidence?
Yes, Your Honor. We would like to recall Mr. Jarrett for the limited purposes of rebuttal testimony of Linda Brickman.
Thank you. Is Mr. Jarrett there?
He is, Your Honor.
And thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you. I'll have the record show that Mr. Valenzuela has left the screen, and we now have Mr. Jarrett back on the screen. Sir, you're still under oath. We don't need to swear you in again.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Go ahead, counsel.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Jarrett, yesterday, plaintiff had a witness by the name of Linda Brickman. Are you familiar with Ms. Brickman?
Yes, I am.
Okay. I'm going to represent, we don't have the record in front of us, obviously, Your Honor, but I'm going to represent for Mr. Jarrett, as best as I can recall, what she testified, and then I want to ask him some questions about that line of testimony. As best as I can recall, Ms. Brickman testified that she was an observer at the duplication station, and she saw ballots that had the oval filled in for the president and the oval filled in for write-in, and the president's name written on the write-in line. She saw those ballots duplicated in the same way, an oval for the president,
write-in oval filled in and the president's name written in. Assuming I'm recalling that testimony correctly, was that the right thing for the duplication board to do?
Yes, that is. That's how we train them to perform that through the duplication process.
But wouldn't that create an overvote?
No, it would not, because the duplication process is not the final stage when we're taking ballots through tabulation. That duplication process would result in that ballot needing to then be printed, run through a central count tabulator. Then it would go to a electronic adjudication board. Those electronic adjudication boards then are trained to review that, and due to a change in the new 2019 version of the Arizona Elections Procedures Manual, that ballot would then be resolved to be a vote for the President Trump.
Okay, and so you said ballots go to the adjudication board. Do all ballots that have overvotes end up at that adjudication board?
That's correct. Every single ballot that has an overvote goes through electronic adjudication.
Okay, and so to be specific to what Ms. Brickman testified, if a ballot has the write-in oval filled in and nothing else, does it go to the adjudication board?
So just the oval for the write-in candidate?
Yes.
No, that would not go to the electronic adjudication. Yes, actually, it depends. If there was a qualified write-in for that contest, it would go to the electronic adjudication board, because the system is looking at ovals, and because we can't, our tabulators can't read handwriting, it would have to be adjudicated by a electronic adjudication write-in board.
Okay, and so to be clear, if a voter marks the oval for Mr. Trump and the oval for a write-in candidate and writes the name Mr. Trump, but their ballot is misread by the tabulator such that it goes to a duplication board, that ballot will ultimately be counted for the president. Is that what you testified?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, now one final line of questioning, and then we're done, Your Honor. If Tom, touch the screen. Just 1 minute, Your Honor. I'm sorry. Your Honor, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Your Honor, can you hear me okay?
Well, now you've got an echo because you've got two speakers.
Just 1 minute. You're going to try this. Your Honor, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Just one moment. I'm so sorry. Okay, I think we're good now. One final series of questions. If someone were observing ballot duplication, and let's say that ballot that I just described, marked for the president and marked with a write-in and the president's name, if that ballot were duplicated, would they be able to follow that ballot to the electronic adjudication board and see the results of that ballot being adjudicated?
That exact specific ballot? No, they would.
They would not. So they would have no way of knowing if they were at the duplication station whether that ballot ultimately was adjudicated for the president. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Your Honor, I have no further questions.
Any of the other lawyers other than Mr. Willencheck have questions? Mr. Willencheck, please. Sorry, I didn't hear you, and I don't know if there was a muting issue. Try again.
I'm sorry, I was double muted. No further questions, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. Any further evidence from the county?
Your Honor, the county rests.
And is there any rebuttal evidence from the plaintiff?
Your Honor, I do have two relatively quick witnesses.
And tell me who they are.
I have Liesl Emerson and Leon Hayward. They were both observers for signature verification.
And what's the subject of their rebuttal?
really just testimony about how quickly county workers were looking at verified signatures, and also the review workers.
Okay, which one are you calling first?
I'll call Liesl Emerson.
Thank you, Ms. Emerson. Are you on the line?
Yes, I am.
Thank you. Spell your name for the clerk, if you would. This is Judge Warner speaking.
Yes, it's Lies as in Sam, Emerson.
Thank you. The clerk will swear you in now.
Your Honor.
Okay.
Your Honor, I'd like to object to this witness because her testimony as described by counsel, it goes to a claim that was dismissed by the court.
Overruled. Let's get you sworn in.
Okay, please raise your right hand. You do solemnly swear the testimony you are about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
All right, Mr. Willenchik, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ms. Emerson, did you serve as a credentialed legal observer for this election?
Yes, I did.
And did you observe signature verification at MCTEC?
Yes.
What did you observe in terms of how quickly workers are performing signature verification?
Well, I observed signature verification for 6 days. The first 5 of those days, I wasn't able to see the screens closely enough to make any determination. But on the last day, I was informed that I could bring binoculars. And using the binoculars, I was able to see what the employees were doing as far as pulling up a signature. And then what I decided I would do is to just count seconds as to how quickly a new signature appeared up on the screen. So the first half of the day I spent in the Tier 1 signature verification room, and I was only able to see 2 employees, but one of those employees, I counted how quickly he was clicking through the signatures, and he was spending 1 to 2 seconds on each signature. The other employee that I was able to observe was clicking through the signatures. Well, actually, let me go back. The first employee that was doing it 1 to 2 seconds, I actually counted how many signatures he did at that pace until he would pause to look at one more closely. And 6 separate times that I was doing this counting, he clicked through 10 signatures at the 1 to 2 second pace. And the most I counted him clicking through before he would pause to look more closely at a signature was 28 signatures before he paused. The second employee that I was able to observe that day was clicking through signatures every 3 to 4 seconds. He was doing it slightly more slowly.
Could you observe whether the county workers were looking at more than one signature on file?
Yes, occasionally they would look at more than one signature, but at that pace, most of them, they were just looking at one signature.
Did you also observe the process by which signatures were reviewed, I'll call it?
But the process by which they were reviewed?
Well, first of all,
question?
Yes.
Okay, so in the Tier 1 room, meaning the first, my understanding is it was the first human that looked at the signature, they pulled up a signature, the scanned signature from the third-party vendor, which would be the signature from the affidavit envelope. And then they would pull up the record that they were comparing it to. The few times that I saw them look at more than one signature, they were able to scroll, back in history to look at more than one signature. But the vast majority of signatures that I saw them passing through were, they just compared to one signature, which I presume to be the most recent signature that they had on file, but I don't know that. But it was just
I'll be clear on my question. I'm sorry to interrupt. Did you observe a process by which this was double-checked in any way by the county?
Okay, so I spent the morning in the Tier 1 room, which is the first person to take a look at a signature. I spent the afternoon in the other signature verification room, which was where I was told it was a manager was reviewing signatures that the Tier 1 employees had thought were in some way questionable. And so I spent the afternoon in that room, and during that time, again, I had to use binoculars to view the process in any meaningful way. And what I did while I was observing that process, the second tier, is I counted a series of 50 ballots in a row and made tick marks and counted 6 seconds. Made tick marks as to how many seconds this second tier reviewer was spending. And out of the 50 ballots that I counted that way, 36 of those ballots, the second tier reviewer spent 15 seconds or fewer reviewing this signature that the first tier had determined was questionable. Then there were 12 that he spent 16 to 30 seconds. 3 signatures he spent, 31 to 60 seconds. 3 signatures he spent 1 to 2 minutes. And then there was only 1 signature that he spent greater than 2 minutes on. The other thing that I did observe there, another set of 50 ballots, I focused on the part of the program where they accept or they just position it. They accept the signature or they send it for the next level review. And of those 50 ballots, the manager in the Tier 2 review accepted 42 of those signatures and sent 8 signatures for further review.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Thank you. Mr. Liddy, any questions?
No questions, Your Honor.
Thank you. Does anybody else have questions?
No questions, Your Honor.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate your time, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next witnesses?
Well, Your Honor, honestly, I think the next witness is duplicative of that testimony. I mean, I don't know what schedule we've still got here. If we still want to get done by 12, I'm willing to rest the case.
Let's talk about the schedule. If everybody's rested at this point, my inclination is to take a 5-minute break, let people regroup and get ready for closings, and then we'll close. I'm willing to go a little bit into the noon hour. I think that gives us enough time. My personal preference, my intention is to get you guys a ruling this afternoon and a written ruling. And so my preference is to finish up so that I can start working on that while we go through the lunch hour. So does everybody agree with that process?
Yes, our defendant is prepared to move forward with closing.
Yeah. So in light of that, Mr. Willenchak, are you resting?
I will rest. Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you. Then let's recess for 5 minutes, let everybody regroup, and then we'll hear closings. We're in recess. We'll go back on the record in civil 2020-015-285. Let me give everybody a chance to gather, and then we'll get started. Cam, are you still there with us?
Yes, I am, Judge. Sorry, I was muted.
No, I just want to make sure you're there and back from your break. So, okay. We're back on the record. Everybody is present. We are ready to begin closing arguments. Mr. Wellencheck, you are the plaintiff with the burden of proof. You'll get to go first and then last.
Your Honor. Well, Your Honor, I think your comments at the beginning of this process on Monday are probably the truest of all, which is that this process is not well designed to determine the true result of an election in the year 2020. Frankly, the same comment was made in the Bush v. Gore litigation by the Florida State Supreme Court, and that was all the way back 20 years ago in the year 2000. We have proceeded to trial within a number of days from filing this case formally, and the court has allowed a degree of discovery here, which has, frankly, resulted in the discovery of some very serious problems with Maricopa County, and our belief is potentially statewide. The testimony that we have heard has shown that even on a very, very limited sampling of 100 ballots that were subject to duplication, there was a 2% error. The county attempted to do further sampling in the short time that we have had available to us here, but even that further sampling still shows an error rate of around half percentile. Now, herein lies the magic of numbers and of statistics, because what the county representative, Scott Jarrett, testified to was that even on that sampling, which did not finish, they got through about 1,500 out of 2,500 anticipated ballots. The 1,500 did not include election day ballots, which were the source of half the error seen on the first sampling. So even though they're reporting a half percentile error rate on their continued sampling, if they were to look at those remaining election day ballots, which again were the source of half the error the first time, well, that statistic is likely to double. So now we're back up to a 1% error at least. We have asked for, and I will reiterate at the end of my closing, a request to inspect all duplicate ballots, all adjudicated ballots statewide, and there is a very particular reason for that. What Mr. Jarrett also testified to is that those processes are subject to human error. We've heard testimony about the machines and how these machines are subject to hand counts that reveal little error in the way that they are performed. But humans are always subject to error, and this is significant in this election because we have here two candidates who are only 0.03% apart. What Mr. Jarrett also testified to is that the number of ballots subject to adjudication is significant. It is, he said, in an estimate, working, I'm sure, off the best knowledge you can gather in these few days, on the magnitude of 200,000 ballots subject to adjudication in Maricopa County alone. And of course, Maricopa County is roughly half the state, so we could extrapolate from there to say, well, the entire state may have on the order of magnitude of 400,000 ballots subject to adjudication. And in terms of duplicate ballots, Mr. Jarrett testified that around 27,000 ballots were subject to duplication in Maricopa County alone. Again, we could effectively double that to the entire state. Finally, what we saw and what, even though it was placed under seal, we certainly heard testified about, was that the ballot duplication process for sure resulted in flipping of the vote. I know, again, those were not shown to the public, and there's no identifiable information on there other than precinct. I don't want to exceed the court's order. I mean, could I at least say the precinct on one of the ballots? It's a general geographic region. No? Okay.
I don't think that's appropriate.
That's fine, Your Honor. There was a real voter here in the state who cast a vote for Donald Trump, and the county flipped that to Joe Biden. There's a real voter who voted one way, and the government made him vote another. Even one ballot like that is significant. And that's what we've seen here, and we've seen it on a statistically significant degree. To further extrapolate on the numbers, and this is obviously the best we can do with this kind of data as it sits here, is to say that, well, if you have that kind of flipping of the vote, we're not even talking about a 0.3% difference in candidates. We're talking about a 0.15. It's really half of that. And if we're talking about something in the order of magnitude of 450,000, again, adjudicated ballots, duplicated ballots, an error even of 0.5 to 1 to 2%, that is enough to render this election uncertain and to potentially flip the results of the election. Your Honor, based on all of the above, we would ask that the court order further inspection of all duplicate ballots and all adjudicated ballots statewide, or that the court, and stay the trial in order to do so, or that the court annul the defense election in accordance with ARS Section 16-6676. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I'm assuming defendants go next and then interveners. If you guys want to switch, that's fine.
That's right, Your Honor. I think we were going to go first if there's no objection from the interveners. Thank you, Your Honor, for scheduling this trial so quickly and patiently hearing the evidence. To paraphrase a Pennsylvania court from a few days ago, ballots, not briefs, voters, not lawyers or judges, decide elections in our constitutional democracy. And 3.4 million Arizonans have cast their vote, and by a margin of over 10,000 voters, Joe Biden won this election. There is nothing that you heard over these last 2 days that would change that even plausibly could change that. And I submit, Your Honor, that should be the end of this case. I think it is worth stepping back for a minute and surveying the landscape of what we've heard over the last 2 days. The plaintiff is seeking a truly extraordinary remedy. She is asking this court to order that the will of those 3.4 million Arizona voters be overturned. She's asking for a court order requiring Arizona to send a different slate of electors to the Electoral College than the Arizona voters chose. She's asking that instead of Biden electors, this court would order that Arizona appoint Trump electors to vote on their behalf at the meeting of the Electoral College on December 14th to cast their votes for the next president of the United States. This is a very significant demand, Your Honor. And Arizona law, and frankly common sense, makes clear that it should only be granted under the most extraordinary of circumstances that plaintiffs haven't even come close to establishing. What we've seen over the past couple of days is that there is nothing but garden variety errors at best that plaintiffs have been able to point to, and that even assuming statistics across Maricopa County with respect to duplication ballots and signature matching, there's no way that that this election could be, the numbers that established Joe Biden as the winner could be changed. Your Honor, of course, has reviewed the briefs, and I won't recap what's in the legal briefs in our motion to dismiss and about the standard required. But to put it simply, Arizona will only overturn an election under very narrow, specific circumstances. And those include 3 reasons the plaintiff somewhat vaguely mentioned in her complaint: misconduct, fraud, or illegal votes, or the counting of erroneous votes that could change the result. Now, I want to say a couple things about what my colleague on the other side said toward the end in terms of the math. First of all, Maricopa County is the only county at issue in this case. They've not made allegations with respect to the rest of the state of Arizona. So any far-flung inferences about the numbers across the state, what they might be or could be, is not part of this case and is not before Your Honor. Adjudication is not before Your Honor. That's not in their complaint. And so what we are talking about here is the claims with respect to duplicated ballots and in Maricopa County, and the claims with respect to signature matching. And what we know is that of the sampling that has been done, there was an error rate of about 0.5% with respect to the duplicated ballots. And some of those votes that were not duplicated correctly were intended for Trump, and some were intended for Biden. These types of errors occur, unfortunately. We would like to have a perfect system, but they happen in every election, in every jurisdiction, all over this country, and they provide clearly do not provide a basis to overturn an election. But showing errors isn't enough. First, turning to the misconduct prong under Arizona law, the complaint didn't really specify which laws or policies were supposedly broken and didn't say who broke them or how or why or when. That's obviously a problem, but they have a bigger problem than they're pleading, and that's that the actual evidence they presented didn't explain it either. You heard from several poll observers, each of whom testified that any errors they saw in ballot duplication were addressed by either the ballot duplication board itself or by nearby supervisors. You heard witnesses like Ken Sampson and Linda Brickman say that there were some discrepancies in the pre-fill software, but you also heard Scott Jarrett testify that they were aware of these issues. The bipartisan board could turn the pre-fill suggestions off at any moment, and that the entire job of the human duplicators was to override those and to ensure that the ballot was duplicated correctly. Did some mistakes get past them? Of course they did. They are humans. Nothing is 100% infallible. But we've seen that the error rates are very, very small. And you heard from Scott Jarrett how the members of the duplication board are trained and how careful the process is and how there are several layers of review, including bipartisan boards, observers, and the like. And plaintiff presented no witness and no exhibits that would in any way show that the errors were intentional or a result of fraud or a result of anything other than garden variety, one-off, poll worker errors. I would submit, Your Honor, in addition, that the testimony we heard today from Mr. Valenzuela and Mr. Jarrett render Ms. Brickman's testimony not credible. And plaintiff presented no witness and no exhibits. Your Honor, I respectfully submit that if the garden variety errors that were identified is grounds to overthrow an election, then we are going to have a real problem on our hands moving forward. You also heard no evidence of fraud or illegal votes. No witness from the plaintiff testified that they felt that the errors were anything other than mistakes. You didn't hear a single witness testify anything nefarious that was going on. In any event, we can't show that any errors with duplicated ballots could have possibly changed the results of the presidential election. That's a showing that plaintiff has to make here in order to prevail. But President-elect Joe Biden won the election with 10,457 more votes. And even assuming that the duplication errors that we saw in discovery would hold steady throughout the entire universe of Maricopa County ballots, and I think that's not a valid assumption, it probably would be lower, it would only net President Trump 120 more votes. So in the end, the errors with duplicated ballots cannot come anywhere near the showing that plaintiff needs to make in order to show that the election results should be overturned completely. So an election contest is certainly not justified on the grounds of any theories about duplicated ballots. So let's turn to signature matching. The complaint also had a theory that not enough signatures were rejected, which resulted in too many ballots being counted. In support of that theory, they submitted the testimony of Lori Hotzel, who has no relevant qualifications and has been discredited by a number of courts. But in any event, she didn't really help the plaintiff meet her burden. Her testimony established that out of a small sample of 100 signatures, she didn't see any evidence of forgery. She felt immediately confident that about 94 of those were accurate and matched, and that she wasn't sure about 6 of them. And that was on the basis that she didn't have enough comparators. And of course, you heard from Dr. Muhammad today, who confirmed that he didn't see any evidence of forgery in any of the ballots that he reviewed, and that when he says that he finds match to be inconclusive, that he's speaking as a forensic document examiner who has to testify in court to prove that somebody ought to potentially go to jail beyond a reasonable doubt if a signature does not match. Of course, election officials have very different task at hand, and they have a lot more information than this, just the signature. And so none of that testimony, I would submit, Your Honor, supports finding that there's a significant systematic problem with signature matching. Of course, Dr. Muhammad, who's looked at numerous election systems for signature matching across the country, said that Maricopa County's was among the best, and that he saw no reason to reject any of these votes based on the signature alone. So let's return to the 3 things that plaintiff is alleging, or apparently alleging here. Maybe it's 4 things: misconduct, fraud, illegal votes, or erroneously cast votes. On the basis of signature matching, they have established 0 of those things. There was no evidence about misconduct, no evidence about fraud, no evidence about illegal votes, and indeed, with respect to signature matching, I would submit no evidence even about a garden variety error of the type that caused an erroneous vote to be counted, and certainly nothing that would lead the court to be able to conclude that signature matching could change the results of the election here. So, Your Honor, we're very happy to answer any questions about any of the arguments in our briefs, but we know you've reviewed them, and we won't rehash those legal arguments again here. But I think at the end of the day, we have a plaintiff that is asking for unprecedented relief from this court. She's asking to upend the results of a presidential election that has never been done before and would seriously undermine the democratic system that this state and this country is built upon. A set of pleadings that does not clearly specify the grounds for the contest, what exact legal authority allows their claim, or what facts support the expansive relief sought. A 2-day trial that has offered little clarity on any of these issues and that has consisted of a series of witnesses who impugn the integrity of Arizona's election with a variety of theories completely unmoored from the facts. And a requested relief that asks the court to overthrow the will of 3.4 million voters in Arizona. That result is not contemplated by law, it is not warranted under the facts, and it is not remotely in keeping with Arizona and the nation's democratic tradition. For all of these reasons, Your Honor, we ask that the court dismiss this case and deny all relief. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Ms. Desai, please.
Thank you, Your Honor. An election contest can be brought only for specifically delineated issues, and I would direct the court to 16673, which is the statute that talks about what a statement of contest must include. And subsection A4 specifically indicates that a statement of contest must have a particular ground for the contest. Among some of the delineated issues that may be raised in an election contest are misconduct on the part of those administering and canvassing the election, on account of illegal votes, and that by account of erroneous count of votes, the person declared elected did not, in fact, receive the highest number of votes for the office. Here's the evidence that was presented yesterday and this morning. The Arizona Republican Party was permitted to and did, in fact, place credentialed poll servers in Maricopa County vote centers and the tabulation center.
The credentialed poll observers who testified at this hearing admitted that they were able to observe the signature verification process, the manual duplication process, and the electronic adjudication process. The testifying poll observers further admitted that when they raised questions or concerns about a county worker's determination about a particular envelope or ballot, the county was receptive to the feedback and agreed to check the work. In some cases, the alleged error was reviewed and corrected immediately. In other cases, the county made a notation of the duplicated ballot number to review at a later time. Not a single poll observer testified that he or she had knowledge that an alleged error was not re-reviewed and corrected. A single poll worker at the tabulation center testified that duplicated ballots were pre-filled, but she admitted that the job of the duplication board was to check and then accurately duplicate ballots. In fact, she testified that she and her board partner changed the pre-fill and accurately duplicated ballots as part of their job. We also heard from Mr. Jarrett that even though the Novus software had a pre-fill function that could be turned off by certain boards or any boards that chose to do so, and in any event, every duplicated ballot was reviewed and duplicated by the board. Mr. Jarrett also testified that there was 100% accuracy with the hand count audit. That means the tabulation machine properly and accurately counted votes. And we also heard evidence that the county workers are trained in handwriting comparison and have significant expertise to confirm the identity of a voter by reviewing all of the items on the ballot envelope affidavit as compared to the voter registration information. The plaintiff spoke about statistical extrapolation. In fact, Mr. Wilenchek said in his closing that the math and the statistics support extrapolating out. But plaintiffs did not offer a statistician or other witness to discuss the statistical significance of any of the numbers or errors that were discovered this week. And even if we were to apply the numbers that Mr. Wilenchek is using, 0.5%, 1%, that error rate, the error rate, if we can call it that, doesn't come close to changing the results in this election. If we look at the actual ballots, envelopes, and duplicated ballots that were reviewed and inspected this week, there were 100 affidavits that were reviewed, and not a single person testified that the signatures appeared forged or made by somebody other than the voter. And Mr. Valenzuela easily reconfirmed the identity of each of the voters. With respect to the former category of duplicated ballots, 1,626 duplicated ballots were inspected. Of those, only 9 mistakes were identified, which resulted in a swing of 6 votes for the office of president. Now, going back to the 3 bases for an election contest that were vaguely alleged in the complaint, and as Your Honor pointed out, in the findings of fact and conclusions of law that were presented by the plaintiff, plaintiff has clearly failed to meet her burden of proving any of these things. There is no evidence of misconduct by election administrators. To the contrary, plaintiff's witnesses testified that the county agreed to check and correct alleged mistakes when observers objected to a determination. There is no evidence of illegal votes. To the extent that some boards use the Novus prefill function, that only applies to duplicated ballots, which we have to remember are a very small universe of ballots in Maricopa County, less than 28,000, and every one of them was checked by a board. There is no evidence that there was an erroneous count of votes. To the contrary, the hand count audit for Maricopa County was 100% accurate. An extremely small number of mistakes were identified. That is not misconduct. Those are not illegal votes. That does not amount to an erroneous count of votes. These minuscule errors, if extrapolated, if that's even permitted, which we do not agree that it is, would change the margin of victory in this presidential race by a fraction, 100, 103, 120, whatever the number is, and I know Your Honor has heard several different numbers over the course of the hearing, but none exceed the low 100. Plaintiffs needed to show a 10,000% greater error rate for her case to even get off the ground. I'll note, Your Honor, that although plaintiff vaguely asserts an election contest as her one and only claim in this case, the factual allegations and theories alleged in the amended complaint relate only to improper or inadequate access to observation. So the signature verification process and the ballot duplication process. That's it. In fact, plaintiffs told this court that those theories justify an inspection of ballots, and the court permitted inspection. But this trial is being used just like that inspection was used to try to discover, find, and hunt for even newer theories of misconduct. They do not exist. As I sit here now, I do not know what plaintiff's theory of misconduct or illegal votes is. Today we heard even new things that were never alleged before in the complaint or by any witness, only through questioning by Mr. Lowencheck of Mr. Valenzuela. Whatever the theory du jour, there is absolutely no evidence of misconduct, illegal votes, or erroneous counts. So the court need not even consider the issue of what relief may be justified. But I will say this about the relief that is requested. Certainly, the entire election cannot be annulled or set aside. Further, there is no basis to declare that the Trump electors have the highest number of votes, and plaintiffs cannot get a recount through an election contest. Mr. Willencheck, in his closing, asked for an inspection of all duplicated ballots, all adjudicated ballots, in the state. Asking for this inspection is a request for a recount dressed up as an election contest. It is improper. It is not permitted by our statute. It is time for this to end. We cannot underestimate the negative impact that vague and unsupported claims of misconduct and illegality in our elections has on the public's perception of the integrity of the election. The facts show that the elections administrators are impartial and care about delivering a fair and accurate election. In fact, they did. The facts show that this was an election with record turnout, which means our democracy is strong. And the facts show that while not everyone's favorite candidate won, there is no reason to reverse the will of the voters and declare that the candidate with fewer votes is the winner. The certificates of election must stand, and we ask this court to deny all relief requested by plaintiffs.
Thank you. And Mr. Liddy, please.
Thank you, Your Honor. This is an election contest under 16672A5, and the plaintiff has failed to meet her burden. Just for the record, there have been no allegations of fraud. None. Section 16550 commands the county to compare signatures. Shall compare the signatures. Allegations, we didn't do it well. Not that there were no mistakes ever made, but that we didn't do it well, and our shortcomings meant that we failed to, Maricopa County failed to meet its duty to the people of Maricopa County. And therefore, the election results should be thrown out. Does that sound absurd? It does to me. 16621A, true duplicate copies shall be made of any ballot goes through the machine tabulation equipment and is not counted. Again, shall, a command by the state legislature that has, by virtue of state constitution, the authority to write the rules of the game. Plaintiff alleges that Maricopa County didn't do its job. And therefore, the votes should all be thrown out. Sound kind of stupid? It does to me. So we have a form here, and it's put up or shut up time. And the plaintiff has to show the evidence. Not mere allegations, but have to show the evidence. So now the show's over, although we may have watched different movies based on closing that I heard. I'm a child of the 70s, Your Honor, so I went through math, and then I went through new math. And I think of all of us here, we've heard junk science. But I've never, until this day, experienced junk math. We went through, as the plaintiff requested, and as the court asked us to, a review. First day on Tuesday, 100 ballots. Then the plaintiff came by and asked if we could look at more, a lot more, 2,500 more. He asked this court to compel Maricopa County to do it. I came to this court in good faith and said, no reason to compel. The Board of Supervisors would be happy to do it. Happy to do it. and I told this court I would need 3 days to do it. And plaintiff asked in his motion to compel that the proceeding be delayed until Monday. I said, if you delay until Monday, I can get it done in 3 days. The court said, for reasons that it made very clear to every participant in this process, no way. We were moving forward because the people had a right to have this adjudicated in a timely fashion so that if there were to be an appeal, it would have time to get to the Arizona Supreme Court. Clear as a bell. So what did we in Maricopa County do? In good faith, we got rolling. And we started that review process at 2:30. And by just after 6:30 in the evening, I called no joy on it. We had an additional 1,526 ballots that had been reviewed, more than enough for a meaningful statistical sample. And I had an obligation to my clients, because of your ruling, to get our exhibits in order and get our witnesses to be prepared. Well, who are those witnesses? We've heard before. We've heard them before this court. Scott Jarrett, Ray Valenzuela, the very two people who were spending hour after hour after hour on their feet supervising the additional review of the 1,526 ballots and maintaining the legally required security of all the other ballots that were in the room, with all the counters and all the observers in there. There was no way, in good faith, that I could continue that process on deep into the night without Mr. Valenzuela there, without Scott Jarrett there, and without me being there, or Ms. Krager or Mr. LaRue. So any insinuation or inference, intended or otherwise, that we fell short of our obligation of completing a review of 2,500 in less than a day is bunk. And if anyone needs further clarification on that, I will be available after this proceeding. Maricopa County has fulfilled all of its obligations and statutory duties, and there has been no evidence to the contrary. None. Zero. There's no legal requirement that every single process in this, every single step in this election be perfect. That's humanly impossible. And the legislature recognizes that, which is why they command the county to tabulate each ballot by machine. That's why. Because when humans do it, they make more errors than machines. Whether one subscribes to that belief or not is not relevant. That's the law. My clients, Maricopa County Board of Supervisors, and the Maricopa County Recorder, and all their employees that work their butts off to get this done, are required to do it that way. So, the plaintiff has said that the election officials have failed or refused to allow legal observers to observe signature verification, and that therefore that constitutes misconduct. Well, we heard witness after witness after witness come before this court and tell us in great detail all that they were allowed to observe, including one who was at McTech for 7 days, walking to whatever room she wanted to walk in, another who said he was able to walk around and view 20 different screens. We didn't hear evidence of people not being allowed to observe. We heard witness after witness after witness talk about how they were able to observe it. Sometimes they observed mistakes being made by humans, and the vast majority of the processes were done with astonishing accuracy. Evidence clearly showed that Maricopa County is one of the best signature verification processes in the USA. That's the math says that, not the new math, not the junk math, the real math says that. And so does, by the way, Dr. Mohammed, who we've heard from here. Mr. Valenzuela's testimony explaining that with his expertise and his training, that they were able to provide training materials and train the staff, and we were able to prove that the individuals in Maricopa County have ensured that the signature verification process as required by law was done
with extraordinary accuracy. The sample that was taken, 100%. Not a single witness that came before this court said that any one of those randomly sampled signatures should have led to a voter being disenfranchised or a ballot not being tabulated. Not a single shred of evidence on that. So that argument should be discarded. Spent a lot of time talking about the duplicate ballots. The plaintiff claims that mistakes were made by the duplication boards. Duplication boards, by law, by reality, have to be done by human beings, and we know human beings make mistakes. Well, we took a significant sample, 1,626 of 27,869. Important number, we're going to get back to that. And they were reviewed, and we found 9 errors. 9 errors. That's a success rate of 99.45. But in reality, Your Honor, it's actually not, because one of those 9 was a ballot that was defaced by a voter in one of the ovals on the presidential line, vigorously either trying to change his or her actions, put several holes that covered more than 35% of the oval. That ballot should have been spoiled. The only way to spoil a ballot in the state of Arizona is for the voter to do it. So the fact that the hole was put in the oval is by conduct of the voter. The fact that it was not spoiled, the choice of the voter. So one of those 9 is not an error by Maricopa County employees. It's an error by the voter. So the real number is 8 out of 1,626. That's a 99.508 in normal math. You move that up to 99.51. 99.51 success rate. Now, if that were my kid, he wouldn't be getting grounded, and he wouldn't be getting a cell phone locked up in a drawer for a week. He'd be getting pizza, probably some ice cream too, or cake, whatever he wants. 99.5. And the fact that we should throw out the election in Arizona because of that, that's not even a joke. That's borderline of tragedy. Someone wouldn't even ask for that. The observers, some claim they couldn't observe the printing of the off-site company. So there was no way to know, for example, whether the electronic ballots were being accurately or properly received by the printing company, and that the company was printing the correct ballots, or that it was delivering the correct ballots back to McTech. Well, we know based on the evidence that the ballots that were returned by the printer had 0 mistakes. None. That's 100%. That's even better than my kid at math. So, pizza and cake for them, too. No evidence at all, by reason of erroneous count of votes, those are plaintiff's words, by reason of erroneous count of votes under the person declared elected, did not, in fact, receive the highest number of the votes. That's the burden. That's the burden for a successful contest. There's no evidence. None. None at all. Testimony of Mr. Lane. You could clearly observe, he said. Bill Trauma testified she saw 2 mistakes and reported both, and both were remedied. Ms. Gray testified no problems at all. She was able to go to any room she wanted to and observe as many screens as she wanted to. Mr. Sampson testified for the record he was able to observe 15 screens. So the evidence is overwhelming that Maricopa County put on an historically accurate election with an historically high voter turnout in the midst of a pandemic. In the midst of a pandemic. My book, it's pizza, cake. In conclusion, Your Honor, the plaintiff is asking this court to throw out 232 years of American history and American culture that is celebrated throughout the world, where the people, through a form of a constitutional republic, get to vote.
among the several states, send their electors to Washington and choose a leader. It's not always a pretty process. It's not always a perfect process. Darn close to it, Maricopa County on November 3rd of 2020. But there is no way that any of this evidence could justify throwing out the votes of the people of Arizona because somebody didn't like the result. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you. Mr. Williamson, you have the last word.
Thank you, Your Honor. Well, Mr. Liddy said we're trying to throw out 100 years of American history and culture. Let's talk about that for a second, because this country was founded by people who overthrew a government and who believe that the right way democracy works, the right way for these courts to function, are to question results, are to question the government. I heard from Mr. Spiva that this is impugning the integrity of the government to contest the vote. This country is about impugning the integrity of the government. It is about questioning things. It is about getting to the truth and the heart of things. It's not about saying election workers deserve cake and pizza because their word goes and we're all going to stand by it, not question it. I think I heard a lot of inflammatory rhetoric out of Mr. Liddy is saying, calling this a joke, calling us a junk. I've got kids too, and when I hear them use words like that, you know what it means? It means they know they've got a problem, they don't want to talk about it. But I'm going to talk about it. The problem the county has here is that it does have high rates of error. We've seen them. I've seen them. There is evidence here of an erroneous count. I believe Ms. Desai stated something to the effect that there wasn't. There is evidence here of an erroneous count. There is evidence here of votes that were flipped, of votes that were discounted. I don't like being prophetic. I mean, what we wrote in our complaint was that we believe that the count was being flipped from Trump to Biden or nullified from Trump and in favor of Biden on a 2-to-1 basis. The real data that we have seen here actually showed that the errors were weighted against Trump on a 3.5-to-1 basis. That's what these statistics are showing. Mr. Spiva stated, well, there's some for Trump, there's some for Biden. That's what we've actually seen. They're mostly against Trump on a 3.5-to-1 basis. Mr. Spiva talked about the testimony of credential observers, election workers. For some reason, he continues to impugn Mrs. Hotzel, even though Mrs. Hotzel's testimony is actually better for defendants than their own expert, Dr. Muhammad. I have respect for both of them, frankly. I think they're both great handwriting experts. And I would agree with Mr. Spiva ultimately that this is about the ballots. This is about what the ballots actually show, what they really are. That's something that, frankly, observers and even election workers can't ultimately speak to. It's about the ballots themselves. That's why we have asked to do what is effectively a recount. I agree with I would agree with Ms. Desai's characterization of it as a recount. I don't agree that the law does not allow for it. I do believe that the law on inspections and in general the civil rules of discovery do allow for, and that's why we've asked for, effectively a recount. Now, we haven't wildly asked for a recount of every vote in the state of Arizona. We have asked for a recount of the votes for these two particular processes that we have credibly identified through discovery have serious issues. This is not junk. This is real. And this is something that I hope the county does not treat as junk, does not take that attitude going into the future. We do appreciate that they started some kind of audit there, although they decided not to finish it, and frankly, they didn't get to the source of half the error on the original audit, which is concerning to us. There was one of the defense or other counsel mentioned something about tabulations by machine. Well, again, this is an issue here with human error. And this is also an issue with the county not performing audits of those sources of human error and certainly not fully auditing in any way. So, Your Honor, again, we have brought this case for good reasons. This is the process under law for getting to the bottom of an election. Historically, I will admit that most of the time candidates concede. They sort of settle their cases from a judicial or legal perspective. This kind of thing does not hit court. But there's nothing wrong with it hitting court. There's nothing wrong with people bringing their claims to court, seeking judicial relief, seeking to get to the bottom of things. That's what we've done here. For all these reasons, Your Honor, again, we ask for inspection of the adjudicated, duplicated ballots statewide and to annul the defense election. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all. I really appreciate your time. Before we recess, I have a very minor housekeeping matter. It's important to the clerk. In the normal process of a trial, if there are exhibits that are marked but not offered or admitted, they get returned to the party. Since we've done this all electronically, the clerk's office asks that I have your permission to simply delete the exhibits that were not offered. Does anybody object to that?
No objection.
Okay. You all obviously have your own digital copies of them. So I'm authorizing the clerk of the court to delete the exhibits that were not admitted. There were none that were offered and not admitted, so that settles that. Is there anything else we need to discuss before we recess?
Nothing plaintiff. Thank you.
All right. Thank you all for your time. I do intend to have a written ruling by the end of the day, and I will take this matter under advisement. We are in recess.